This is a photo of some of my family. Specifically, this is my sister's daughter's children. So they're my grandnephew and my grandniece. They're also my parents' first great-grandchildren, and most of the time I think my parents are a lot more excited about their great-grandchildren than they were about their grandchildren. My niece's husband is a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. His grandfather immigrated to Canada from Zimbabwe many years ago. They are part of my family. It's disturbing to think that some of my family are at a greater risk simply because their skin is a different color than mine. Two stories have dominated the news this week. The first is the continuing story of COVID-19, which is impacting all of our lives. The second is the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police, followed by the demonstrations that have happened all across the United States, all across Canada, even right here in Fredericton. That story should also impact us all. I am grieved. I am disturbed by some of the things I've seen in the news this week. I'm also encouraged. I am also hopeful as I watch more and more people who are willing to speak out against abuse and discrimination and racism. As a church, Grace has for several years sought to be a community of faith that celebrates the mosaic that makes up God's people. Ephesians 2:21 says, "In Christ, the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord." Paul tells us Jesus is building a place where God lives on earth. The next verse says the building is not a brick and mortar structure, it is a people, God's people. Ephesians 2:22, "In Christ you are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by His Spirit." We are all being built together, Paul said. We are all connected to one another, and we are one and united in Christ. This is the reason why the stories of sin and racism should impact and affect us all. When one part of God's house hurts, we should all feel it. This week at Grace, we're going to begin a summer series of messages called Living Inside Out. Each week, we'll dig into a story from the book of Acts, and we'll see how our inner life with God fuels our outer life, the life that everyone sees. We'll also see how life in the church impacts our lives outside the church. That what happens inside will come out. Living inside out. Thinking about that today, though, about the issues of racism and injustice, what might living inside out look like? I listened this morning to a conversation between a couple of pastors that I know from Halifax, from the African United Baptist Association, and a couple of pastors I don't know who I think are here in New Brunswick. I'll put the link up in the description for this video. It's an hour and a half long conversation, but it's worth listening to as it's full of some enlightening stories as you hear about the trauma that recent events have inflicted into people's lives. One comment cut me. Halifax pastor said one of the things that was discouraging was the silence from his non-black peers. Deafening and hurtful were his words. Only a few of his non-black pastor friends have reached out to him. Well, what can we do? How about reaching out to who you know? Write a note, send a text, make a call to someone you know who probably is hurting as they watch the news this week, or just needs to know that someone cares, needs to know that racism doesn't have to be the last word. Let them know that someone is thinking about them, praying for them, and that we stand as allies because we are all part of one another and we are all part of God's building.